Story number 1.
We weren't supposed to be out there that night. Not really. The campground was technically closed for the season, and the weather warnings had been all over the radio all day. But Noah was determined. He'd bought all new gear, talked up the whole trip for weeks, and was set on breaking in his new tent. Emily and Jordan, always up for something borderline stupid, were already packed and waiting in his truck when he picked me up. I was the hesitant one, but I figured one night out in the woods in the rain couldn't be worse than being stuck in my apartment, listening to the neighbors fight again. It was a long drive up into the mountains, past the lake and onto the Forest Service road that hadn't been graded in years. The trees were all turning, their orange and red leaves plastered to the road by sheets of steady rain. Fog hung low, making the headlights feel useless. We passed a locked gate at one point, but Noah had it handled. A side path through a ditch that he claimed he'd used before. The path was slick and narrow, winding for another mile or so before opening into a clearing we all remembered from previous trips. There was an old fire ring, a few rotting logs to sit on, and the half-collapsed remains of a wooden picnic table. The place had always felt a little isolated, but that night it was different. Heavier, somehow. The rain had settled into a constant drone on the trees and the truck's roof. None of us spoke much as we unloaded. We set up camp fast, racing the dark and the worsening downpour. By the time the tents were up and the small fire coaxed into life beneath a tarp Noah rigged between two trees, we were soaked to the skin and too tired to pretend we were having fun. Still, it had a weird charm to it. We huddled close, passing a bottle around and laughing about how miserable we were. The rain kept us locked in, our world reduced to that small circle of firelight and wet canvas. Thunder rumbled every so often, distant but steady. Everything beyond the trees was just black. We were finishing up dinner, burnt sausages and half-cooked rice, when Emily turned suddenly, staring into the trees. "Did you hear that?" she asked. We all went quiet. Rained. Wind. A crack of branches shifting somewhere out in the dark. Nothing else. "Probably a deer," Jordan said, "or a raccoon." Emily didn't look convinced. She kept glancing over her shoulder while we finished eating. I figured she was just spooked from the storm. The woods get weird in the rain, all the familiar sounds muffled, the forest feeling smaller and stranger. We called it an early night. Jordan and Emily took one tent, Noah and I took the other. The plan was to dry off, sleep it out, and head back early the next morning. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up. I didn't know why at first, just one of those sudden, unnatural wake-ups. I lay there, listening. The rain had eased up a bit and the wind had died completely. The forest was too quiet. Then I heard the crunch. Footsteps. Not animal, human. Someone walking slowly just outside our tent. I held my breath. I could hear the squelch of waterlogged earth beneath boots, or bare feet maybe. It was deliberate. A few steps, then nothing, then a few more. Circling. I nudged Noah. He grunted, annoyed. "Shh! Listen," I whispered. We both lay there. Then we heard it again. This time it stopped right next to the tent wall, maybe a foot from my head. A low voice whispered something I couldn't make out. Then a long, wet breath, like someone exhaling straight through the fabric. Noah sat up and grabbed the flashlight. I fumbled for the zipper, but the moment the light flicked on, everything stopped. We burst out of the tent, shining the light in every direction. Nothing. Just trees, rain dripping from the branches. The fire had gone out completely, and the whole camp looked like it had been sitting abandoned for weeks. Tents sagging, gear soaked through, everything pale under the flashlight's beam. Jordan and Emily came out of their tent, bleary-eyed and confused. "You guys hear that?" Noah asked. Jordan shook his head. "What are you talking about?" I didn't sleep after that. Neither did Noah. We stayed up, flashlight on, knives within arm's reach. Not that they do much good. Nothing else happened, but we kept hearing little noises. Branches snapping, leaves rustling in patterns that didn't feel random. By morning, we were all exhausted. The storm had passed, but everything was soaked and freezing. We packed up in silence. No one talked about the night, not really. We just wanted out. As we headed down the trail, Emily stopped. "Wait," she said. "Do you see that?" There were prints, not boot prints, bare feet, deep in the mud leading up from the woods onto the path. They looked old, like someone had stood there for a while facing the camp. Then they just stopped, no trail leading away. Maybe some hiker, Jordan said, trying to sound casual. Forgot his shoes. In the middle of a storm? Emily said, not amused. We made it back to the truck. Noah turned the key. Nothing. Dead. Battery's fine, he muttered, getting out to check under the hood. This doesn't make sense. It took an hour of tinkering and cursing before it finally turned over. None of us relaxed until we hit pavement again. That night I kept thinking about those footsteps, the whisper, that breath. The next day I got a text from Emily. Do you guys smell anything weird? Like mold? Wet leaves? I thought maybe she left something damp in her room, but I checked my own place just in case. My apartment was dry, nothing smelled off, but when I went into my bedroom, I found something on the floor. A single wet footprint. Human. Bare. Right by the window. I didn't tell the others. Not yet. 3 nights later, Jordan texted all of us in the group chat. Something's not right with Emily. She keeps waking up screaming, says someone's whispering to her in her sleep. I asked what she was hearing. He said she kept repeating the same phrase. Let me back in. I'm cold. I'm still out there. Noah brushed it off, said it was just stress, a bad trip and some group hysteria. But I started noticing things too. Wet footprints in the hallway, a knock at the window at 3 a.m. I lived on the 3rd floor. My window faced an alley with nothing beneath it but a dumpster and cracked pavement. Still, the knocks kept coming. One night, I stayed up to see if I could catch whatever was doing it. Nothing happened all night. Just when I was about to give up, I heard the floorboards creak outside my bedroom, not the hallway, inside my apartment. I opened the door slowly. There was a trail of muddy water leading from my front door to the center of the living room. The front door was locked, deadbolt still in place. But right there, in the middle of the carpet, was a single wooden carving, about the size of a soda can. Rough, featureless, a figure with no face, its arms outstretched, like it was waiting to be picked up. I threw it out the window. The next morning, it was back, on the kitchen table. We stopped talking about it after a while. What were we supposed to say? That we brought something back from a trip we should never have taken? That something followed us through the storm and the trees and decided not to leave? Emily moved out of state. She and Jordan split up not long after. She wasn't sleeping. Kept hearing footsteps. Found dirt under her nails every morning, even though her apartment was spotless. Noah disappeared for 3 days once. Said he'd been driving, trying to find the campsite again, but couldn't. He ended up somewhere in the mountains with no memory of how he got there. Said he saw someone in the woods watching him. A tall man. Pale, no face, just standing in the rain. I tried burning the carving. Wouldn't catch. Tried burying it. Dug it back up the next morning, wet, clean, like it had never been touched by soil. I left it on a stranger's porch once, drove across town to do it. The next morning, it was in my shower. We don't talk about the camping trip anymore, but we still hear the whisper sometimes, still find footprints, still smell the rain even on dry days, and sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear that voice again. Let me back in. Story the end.
Story number 2.
We had planned the trip for over a month, and even though the forecast predicted rain, we decided to go ahead with it. It was supposed to be a weekend escape, a chance to get away from the noise of the city, the deadlines, and everything else that was slowly burning us out. There were 4 of us. Me, my friend Josh, his girlfriend Nicole, and my cousin Eric. We were all in our late 20s, still chasing stability, still wondering if any of this meant something more than routine. Josh had found a camping spot tucked away in a remote part of the Olympic National Forest, off an old service road that looked like it hadn't been driven on in years. We arrived Friday afternoon, parked the SUV off the road near a faded wooden trail sign that pointed into dense firs and cedar. It took us nearly an hour to hike to the clearing, a small patch of flattened land surrounded by thick trees next to a slope that led down to a stream. It looked like no one had been there in years. It felt untouched, almost sacred in a way. The silence was thicker than I expected. Even the birds seemed to keep their distance. By the time we got the tents up and the fire pit assembled, the sky was already a pale gray. The rain started softly, light drops falling through the canopy. We cooked hot dogs over the fire and opened a bottle of bourbon that Josh had packed. Eric kept checking his phone even though there was no service, and Nicole hummed songs under her breath while brushing her hair. Everything felt normal, until just after dark. It started with the sound of something moving through the woods. At first, it was easy to dismiss. The occasional snapping of a twig, the rustle of leaves in the wind. But the rain had soaked everything, and the woods were heavy with moisture. Those sounds didn't carry the same way they normally did. These were sharp, deliberate, like something or someone was walking near the edge of our camp. Josh froze when he heard it too. Nicole laughed nervously and said it was probably a raccoon or deer. Eric, though, looked genuinely unsettled. He stood near the fire with his hands in his hoodie pocket, staring toward the trees. "It's not a raccoon," he said quietly. No one answered. Eventually, the noises faded, and we told ourselves it was nothing. We climbed into our tents, we called split between guys and girls. Josh and I took one tent, Eric and Nicole the other. The rain grew heavier overnight, and every so often I thought I heard something brushing the side of the tent, like fingers dragging along the nylon. But I didn't say anything. Neither did Josh. The next morning, things felt off. The firewood we'd stored under the tarp was scattered, like someone had come through during the night and kicked it apart. A few of our camping supplies had been moved. Not stolen, just placed in weird spots. Nicole swore she'd put the lantern next to the cooler, but it was lying beside a tree a few feet away. "Maybe an animal dragged it," she said, trying to sound casual. "Animals don't do that," Eric said. We spent the day trying to shake it off. We hiked down to the stream and skipped rocks, made jokes, took photos. But there was tension in the air, a low hum that none of us acknowledged directly. When we returned to camp in the afternoon, we found something that made my blood go cold. There were footprints in the mud, barefoot, human footprints, leading from the trail and stopping right at the edge of our fire pit. No one in our group had gone barefoot. The prints were deep, the toes splayed wide, as if the person had been standing there for a while, just watching. We stood there, staring at them in silence. "Someone else must be camping nearby," Nicole finally said, her voice trembling. Josh scanned the trees. "We haven't seen anyone." "There's no one else out here," Eric said. "You saw the trail. This place is abandoned." "Then who the hell was it?" I asked. No one answered. We rebuilt the fire and sat close to it that night, not talking much. The rain never fully stopped, just hovered between a drizzle and a steady patter. Sometime after midnight, Eric said he had to take a leak and wandered off with his flashlight. He was gone for a while, too long. When he finally returned, he was pale and shaking. "I saw something," he said. Josh and I stood up. "What? Where?" "Down the slope, near the stream." "What did you see?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "A woman." Nicole gasped. She was just standing there, barefoot, soaked, wearing this long dress or nightgown or something. Her hair was all in her face, but she was looking at me. I could feel it. We didn't know what to say. We walked with him back down to where he saw her, but there was nothing. We go like just trees and water and fog. No footprints, no sound, nothing. We tried to sleep that night, but none of us really did. Every small sound sent my heart racing. At one point, I thought I saw a shadow pass by the side of our tent, long and slow, as if someone was crawling past. In the morning, we all agreed we were leaving. We packed in near silence, trying to ignore the fact that several of our things had moved again. Nicole's jacket was hanging in a tree, soaked through. My watch was half buried in the mud near the trail, even though I'd left it inside my tent. The hike back felt longer than it had coming in. The woods seemed darker, denser. The trail twisted in a way that didn't feel familiar. And then we came to a fork that none of us remembered. Two paths, both muddy, both heading into identical trees. "This wasn't here before," Josh said. "We followed the markers," I said. "There was only one trail in." "There's no markers now," Nicole said. We stood there, cold and wet, debating which way to go. Eric finally picked one. "Left. It feels right." We followed him. An hour passed, then two. We weren't getting closer to the car. The trail dipped, then rose again, winding in circles. Everything looked the same. We realized we were lost. That's when the whispering started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind, just soft voices. Too soft to make out the words. They came from the trees, from behind us, from ahead. No direction, no logic, just whispers, growing more intense with every step. Nicole covered her ears and started crying. Josh grabbed my arm and hissed, "Do you hear that?" We started to run. Branches slapped at our faces. Mud sucked at our boots. The rain blurred everything. We just ran, away from the whispers, away from the forest, away from whatever had followed us. We finally broke through into a clearing. It wasn't the road. It wasn't anything we recognized. But we stopped because standing at the edge of the clearing was the woman. Pale skin, wet white gown clinging to her body. Her hair was plastered to her face, but I could see her eyes. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Josh shouted something and threw a rock at her. It passed through the space she occupied, not around her, through her, like she wasn't there at all. Then she was gone. No fade, no slow dissolve, just gone. We turned and kept moving. By some miracle, we found the road later that day. We burst through the trees, covered in scratches and soaked to the bone, and saw the SUV parked exactly where we left it. It felt like a dream. We didn't talk during the drive back, not even once. That was 3 years ago. Eric doesn't speak about it at all. He moved to Arizona shortly after and hasn't returned to the Northwest since. Nicole and Josh broke up a few months after the trip. She started seeing a therapist. Josh drinks more than he used to. Me? I sometimes still hear the whispers when it rains at night. They come from the corners of the room, just behind the walls. They're not words, not really, just sounds. But I know they're real. I know what I saw. And I know she's still out there, waiting in the woods. Story the end.
Story number 3.
We were 5 in total. Me, my cousin Armin, our mutual friend Samir, and 2 of Armin's college friends, Kiran and Ravi. The plan was simple. A weekend camping trip to Mullayanagiri Hills. We had all agreed on something secluded but not too remote. Mullayanagiri was perfect, lush, wild, and usually quiet during the monsoon season. The idea was to hike up during the day, set up camp before nightfall, grill some food, share some drinks, and enjoy the night. But none of us had imagined what was actually waiting for us in those woods. It had rained intermittently the whole week, but we didn't let that stop us. The rain gave the forest a mysterious aura, a kind of haunting beauty, and we all thought that added to the thrill. We left from Chikmagalur in the late morning and began our hike. The path was slick with mud, but we managed without issue. We were laughing, slipping occasionally, but in good spirits. Arman and I had camped a few times before, but for Kiran and Ravi, this was new territory. Samir, ever the quiet one, didn't talk much, but looked calm. I remember he carried a thick notepad, scribbling random things from time to time. He liked journaling. We reached the clearing by late afternoon. It wasn't an official campsite, just a flat patch of land a little off the trail, surrounded by thick trees. The canopy overhead let in just enough light to feel comfortable, but still left shadows lurking in the corners. We pitched 2 tents, one for me, Armin, and Samir, and the other for Kiran and Ravi. The rain had let up, and the air smelled fresh, earthy, like moss and wet leaves. We set up a tarp over a small pit we dug out for the fire and managed to get it going with some dry twigs Armin had packed in a waterproof bag. By evening, we were sitting around the fire, roasting vegetables, sipping on cheap whiskey, and swapping stories. It felt like any regular camping trip. I remember Kieran bringing up ghost stories at some point, and we all laughed when Ravi admitted he believed in spirits. He even had some family superstition about avoiding wet nights in the woods. We teased him, but he took it lightly, smiling nervously. It started raining around 10 p.m., heavier than before. The sound of water hitting the tarp and leaves was loud, almost drowning out our voices. We decided to call it a night around 11:30. The fire was mostly embers by then, and the cold had begun to seep into our jackets. We split off into our tents. The rain kept drumming, and the forest around us felt alive, like it was breathing, shifting, murmuring. I remember lying there, unable to sleep immediately. The air inside the tent was damp. Samir was already snoring lightly, and Arman lay facing the tent wall. At some point, I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember is waking up suddenly. I didn't know why at first. There wasn't any loud noise, just the steady patter of rain. But something felt off. I checked my phone, 2:37 a.m. The battery was low, around 20%. I lay still for a while, listening. Samir had stopped snoring. Arman was breathing heavily, not quite a snore, but deep sleep. Then I heard it, a faint crunch outside the tent. Not the rain, something else. Like footsteps on wet leaves, slow, deliberate. I held my breath. It didn't move for a while, just a single step, then silence. I nudged Arman gently. He didn't wake. I sat up, straining to hear. Another step, then another. It was definitely footsteps, and they were circling the tent. I whispered, "Samir?" He stirred, rubbed his eyes, looked at me. I pressed a finger to my lips and pointed outside. He listened. We both froze when we heard it again. He mouthed, "What the hell?" There was no light except what little filtered in from our dying flashlight lantern at the tent's edge. Samir slowly reached for it, clicked it on. A dim glow filled the tent. The steps had stopped. We sat there, silent, for maybe 10 minutes, but nothing happened. Eventually, Armand stirred, grumbled, and asked what was going on. We told him quietly. He brushed it off as an animal, maybe a deer, maybe a wild dog. We tried to go back to sleep, but none of us managed. The rain grew louder again, and sometime after 3:30, we must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is morning light seeping through the tent fabric. It had stopped raining, though everything was still soaked. We stepped out into the chilly air, the fire pit drowned, everything covered in dew. The others joined us. I asked if Kiran or Ravi had stepped out during the night. Both shook their heads. Samir looked shaken. He pointed at something on the ground. Just outside our tent, there were footprints, not boot prints, bare feet, human but narrow and long, with abnormally long toes, and they were deep, deeper than any of ours. Whatever made them had to be heavy. They circled our tent, exactly as we'd heard. Then they trailed off into the woods. We followed them for a bit. They vanished into thicker brush, maybe 15 feet in. The five of us stood there, staring at the spot in silence. I remember Ravi looked pale. He whispered something in Kannada I couldn't catch. I wanted to pack up right away, but Armand insisted we were just spooking ourselves. "It's probably some local who lives nearby," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. The rest of the day went on uneventfully. We hiked a bit, tried to enjoy the scenery, but the mood had changed. Everyone was more quiet, more alert. We didn't talk much about the footprints. It was like we all silently agreed to pretend it hadn't happened. That night, it rained again, heavier. Thunder echoed in the hills, and wind whipped through the trees. We went to bed early. Around midnight, I woke up again. Samir was already awake, sitting up with the flashlight off. Armin was mumbling in his sleep. I was about to say something when we both heard it, crying, faint. A woman's voice, distant but clear, crying softly. It didn't make sense. Who would be out here in this weather at this time? We looked at each other, and without a word, we unzipped the tent slightly and peered out. The rain was thick, visibility poor, but the sound continued. It wasn't coming from the trees. It was closer, around us. Then it stopped. No fading out, no rustling, just silence. Armin snapped awake and asked what was going on. We told him. He didn't say anything, just stared at the tent wall. The next morning, we were all on edge. Ravi refused to stay another night. Kiran was unusually quiet. We agreed to pack up. But when we stepped out of our tents, there was something worse waiting. On a tree, maybe 10 feet from the tents, someone or something had smeared mud in long finger-like streaks, like handprints, but dragged downward. Above them, etched into the bark with what looked like a knife or stone, were symbols. I don't know how to describe them. Not letters, more like spirals and jagged shapes. Ravi dropped to his knees and started muttering a prayer. Kiran turned and threw up. We didn't wait. We packed up in near silence, left everything we couldn't carry. Armin tried to act tough, but even he moved quickly. We were on the trail by 8 a.m., moving fast. It rained the whole way down. We reached Chikmagalur by early afternoon and booked a hotel for the night. No one spoke much during the drive. That night, we all stayed in the same room. No one wanted to be alone. Samir didn't sleep. He sat on the floor by the window all night, flipping through his notebook. I saw what he'd written. Pages of sketches, the tree, the footprints, the symbols. And then something else. A figure, tall, gaunt, eyes completely black, no clothes, long fingers, standing in the rain, watching. He hadn't seen it with his eyes, he said. He'd seen it in his dreams, both nights, always standing just at the edge of our tents, watching. A week after we got back, Samir stopped replying to our messages. Armin went to visit him. He said Samir had moved out of his flat. No one knew where he went. Kiran hasn't gone camping since. Ravi won't talk about the trip at all. Armin and I don't bring it up anymore, not even when we meet. But I still think about it, especially when it rains. A few months ago, I went through my phone's photos from the trip. Most were fine. Trees, the fire, our tents. But one picture stopped me cold. It was a group photo we'd taken the first night with the forest behind us. We were all smiling, arms around each other. But just behind Samir in the trees, barely visible through the leaves, was a face, pale with sunken eyes and an impossibly wide mouth. Watching. I deleted the photo, but I still see it when I close my eyes. Story. The end.
Story number 4.
It was late October, and I remember it vividly because of the rain. My two oldest friends, Naveen and Rahul, and I had planned this camping trip for weeks. We were all in our late 20s, trying to take a break from the monotony of our jobs in Bangalore. Rahul had managed to borrow his cousin's SUV, and Naveen knew of a less-traveled hill range deep in the western Ghats, somewhere near Agumbe. It wasn't a designated campsite, just a spot he'd found during a trek a few years back. Flat ground, a small clearing with a stream nearby, surrounded by thick forest. Isolated and beautiful. The forecast warned of light rain, but we were prepared for that. We had waterproof tents, good boots, and enough food for 2 days. We weren't hardcore survivalists, just 3 guys who used to go on these kinds of adventures during college and wanted to feel young again. We left the city around 8 a.m., drove for 7 hours, stopping only for fuel and some snacks, and arrived at the base of the hills by late afternoon. The sky had already started graying when we parked the car at the last drivable point. From there, it was a 90-minute hike to the clearing. By the time we got to the site, it was nearly dark. The rain had started, not heavy, but steady enough to soak through if we lingered. We pitched our tents quickly under a cluster of trees and set up a tarp over a fire pit Naveen had dug. The forest around us was alive with the sounds of rain, insects, and distant bird calls. It was eerie, but not unpleasant. A low mist had begun to settle on the forest floor. We ate instant noodles, drank some rum from a flask Rahul had brought, and talked about everything: work, women, college memories. Around 11 p.m., the rain intensified, drumming against the tarp with relentless force. We put out the fire, zipped into our tents, and tried to sleep. I shared a tent with Naveen, while Rahul had his own just a few feet away. Sleep didn't come easy. The sound of rain was louder than I'd anticipated, and the forest around us creaked and sighed like it was alive. Around 1 a.m., I woke up with a start. I didn't know why. I just remember sitting up and feeling an overwhelming sense of unease. The rain was still falling, and Naveen was sleeping soundly beside me, but something felt wrong. I listened carefully. There was a sound outside the tent. Not the rain, not wind or rustling trees. Something else. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps moving just beyond the tent. I froze. My heart raced. I strained to hear. They were soft but unmistakable, like someone walking barefoot on wet earth. I gently nudged Naveen. He stirred, groggy, and looked at me. I whispered, "Listen." He stayed quiet, and we both listened. The footsteps stopped, then a low, wet breathing sound, like someone standing right outside the tent, exhaling through a throat full of water, gurgling, struggling. Naveen's eyes widened. We both sat still, not daring to move or speak. I reached for my phone, but it was dead. Naveen's was off to save battery. We didn't have a torch inside the tent, only the small lantern hanging at the entrance. We didn't turn it on. Minutes passed. The breathing stopped. No footsteps, just rain. We waited, still and silent, until we heard Rahul's voice from his tent. "Guys?" It was a whisper, hoarse and scared. "You heard that too?" Naveen called back softly. Rahul didn't answer for a few seconds. Then, "There's someone outside. I saw a shadow. It was tall, just standing there." We didn't reply. We didn't know what to say. None of us left our tents. We stayed awake till dawn. When the rain lightened and a pale gray sky filtered through the trees, we finally stepped out. Everything looked normal, wet, misty, quiet. But on the ground, around our tents, were footprints. Not shoe prints, bare feet, large, wide, with elongated toes, and they didn't look right. They looked wrong. Each toe was too long, the arch too flat, and they sank deep into the mud as if whatever made them was heavier than any human should be. We followed the prints a few feet into the forest before they just stopped. Not faded, not turned, just stopped mid-step like the thing had vanished into thin air. We packed up quickly. None of us talked much. We were soaked, tired, and unnerved. We didn't eat breakfast. We just walked to the car and drove without music, each of us lost in our thoughts. A few days later, Rahul called me. He sounded shaken. "I think something followed me back," he said. He explained that 2 nights after we got home, he'd woken up around 2 a.m. to the sound of dripping water in his apartment. When he turned on the lights, he found wet footprints leading from his living room to his bedroom window. No broken lock, no open doors. But the prints were identical to the ones we saw at the campsite. I didn't know what to say. I told him to call the police, but he just said they wouldn't understand. That was the last time Rahul stayed in that apartment. He moved in with his parents in Mysore, and last I heard, he doesn't sleep without the lights on. A week after that, Naveen had an accident. He was driving home from work when he claimed something ran in front of his car, a tall, pale figure. He swerved to avoid it and crashed into a tree. He escaped with only a broken arm, but when I visited him at the hospital, he looked haunted. I saw its face, he whispered to me when we were alone. It had no mouth, just this hole, a black pit, and its eyes. They were leaking water, like it was crying, but the tears were muddy. I didn't believe him at first. I thought it was shock, trauma from the crash. But he insisted. He wouldn't let anyone close his hospital room windows at night. He said he kept hearing it breathing outside. And then 2 nights ago, something happened to me. I was asleep in my apartment and a dream woke me. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. I saw the forest again, wet and silent. I was standing in the clearing. My tent was collapsed. Rain fell sideways. And in front of me stood the figure, taller than any man, gaunt, gray skin dripping with water, its head tilted unnaturally like a broken neck. It didn't speak, it just stared at me. And I felt this overwhelming dread like I was sinking into the earth. I woke up in a sweat. There were wet footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom window. I live on the 3rd floor. I didn't leave my apartment the next day. I checked the locks, the windows, everything. Nothing broken, nothing open. But the footprints were real. My carpet still smells like the forest. I tried to find the exact coordinates of where we had camped. I even called Naveen to help me retrace the map. But no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't find that clearing again. The trail doesn't match any known hiking route. Naveen's GPS history didn't save the hike. It's like the place vanished. Rahul and I still talk sometimes, but mostly about normal things, work, movies, the news. Neither of us mentions that night anymore. Naveen has started going to church again. He was never religious before, but sometimes on rainy nights, I sit on my couch and listen, and I swear I still hear it. The footsteps, the gurgling breath, that slow, dragging sound moving across my ceiling, even when I'm alone, especially when I'm alone. Story the end.
Story number 5.
We'd been planning the trip for almost 2 months. My cousin Jayant, his friend Mitesh, and I all needed a break from the noise and chaos of Pune. Jayant had recently bought a new SUV, and he was eager to take it somewhere off-road. Mitesh, always the nature buff, suggested a place he'd once visited on a college trek, deep in the Sahyadri Hills, beyond Peth. It wasn't a proper camping ground, just a flat area surrounded by dense forest. The place had no name that we knew of, but he swore it was beautiful, untouched, and perfect. We packed enough supplies for 3 days, tent gear, sleeping bags, torches, instant food, and a couple of bottles of Old Monk to keep us warm at night. Mitesh warned us about leeches and snakes because of the monsoon, but none of us were too worried. It had been raining on and off the whole week, but we were eager to get away. We left early on a Saturday morning and drove nearly 6 hours, the last stretch on a muddy trail that felt like it hadn't seen wheels in months. By the time we parked and began the hike to the site, the clouds had begun to thicken again. It was mid-afternoon when we finally reached the spot. Flat earth surrounded by towering trees, wildflowers dotting the periphery, and the smell of wet soil so thick it felt like we were breathing it. The air was damp, but not cold, and except for the occasional distant bird call, the forest was silent. We set up our tents, 2 of them, one for Jayant and Mitesh, one for me, and gathered some firewood. We weren't allowed to make large fires because of forest regulations, but we made a small one in a dugout pit using the dry wood Mitesh had carried in a sealed sack. As the sun dipped, the woods became darker than I expected, and the mist began to roll in low, hugging the forest floor. That night, we cooked instant noodles, drank a bit, and talked about our old school stories. It was all very normal until the rain started again. Light at first, then heavier. We retreated to our tents, laughing as we dove through the mud and zipped up the flaps. I remember lying back in my sleeping bag, listening to the drumming of the rain above and feeling completely at peace. It was maybe 10:45 when I finally turned off my torch. I woke up to the sound of someone walking outside. At first, I thought it was Jayant or Mitesh. The sound was unmistakable, squelching footsteps in wet mud. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and called out softly, "Jayant?" No answer. The footsteps stopped. I unzipped the tent door halfway and peeked out with my flashlight. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The woods looked the same, dark and wet, the mist now thicker, clinging to the trees like a second skin. I swung the beam of my light slowly. No one. Then I noticed the other tent, Jayant and Mitesh's. It was zipped shut, dark, unmoving. I frowned. Maybe I had imagined it. The sound of rain can play tricks, and I'd been drinking a little. I zipped the flap shut again and lay back down. But just as I started to drift off, I heard it again. Footsteps. This time they circled my tent. I froze. It was slow, deliberate, dragging footsteps. They squelched softly around me, stopping every few feet. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. My heart was racing, loud in my ears. Then, very clearly, just inches from the tent wall, I heard breathing, wet, rattling breathing, like someone struggling to draw air through fluid. I could hear every labored inhale, the faint wheeze at the end of each exhale. I wanted to call out but couldn't. My throat locked up. I stayed there for what felt like hours, muscles stiff, listening. And then, just as suddenly, the sound faded. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the tent ceiling. When morning came and the light filtered through the trees, I stumbled out, soaked in sweat despite the cool air. Jayant and Mitesh were already up making coffee. They both looked tired. Jayant had dark circles under his eyes. "I didn't sleep at all," he muttered. "Did you hear that last night?" I nodded slowly. Footsteps. Mitesh looked up sharply. "You heard them too?" None of us wanted to admit what we thought. Instead, we checked the area. Around both tents, the mud was disturbed. Not boot prints. Bare feet. Long, narrow, almost skeletal. We followed the prints to the edge of the clearing where they just stopped. No turn, no fade. Just stopped mid-stride. Mitesh went pale. This isn't a place we should stay. But Jayant insisted it was probably a local or maybe an animal. He wanted to stay. He said it was one night, maybe a shared dream or collective paranoia. I wanted to leave too, but I didn't push it. Jayant was the driver, and I didn't want to create tension. That day, we kept close to the campsite. No one went exploring. Every rustle, every breeze made us jump. The sky stayed overcast, and by late afternoon, the fog had returned, thicker than before. We made a small fire, skipped the drinks, and cooked silently. When we got into our tents that night, I could feel the tension. Everyone was scared, even if no one admitted it. I kept my torch beside me, switched on. It started with a whisper. Not the wind, a voice. Low, female, whispering something I couldn't understand. It came from the forest, distant, almost like a chant. I unzipped my tent flap slightly and listened. The mist was dense now, a pale wall all around us. I couldn't see more than 10 feet out. Then I saw movement, a shape, tall and thin, just beyond the edge of the clearing, standing still, too still. I clicked my light towards it. Nothing. But then came the footsteps again, this time faster, circling both tents. I could hear Jayant's voice from inside his tent, muffled, panicked. Then something slammed into the side of my tent. Hard. I screamed. The whole thing rocked. I scrambled back against the opposite wall, heart hammering, flashlight trembling in my grip. Something brushed along the fabric, fingers. I could see the shape of them pressing into the nylon, long, thin, almost claw-like. And then, just like that, it was gone. I burst out of the tent, barefoot, yelling for Jayant and Mitesh. They came out too, terrified. We stood there, three of us in the rain and mist, turning our torches in every direction. There was nothing there. But again, the ground told a different story. Footprints, all around us, in the shape of a spiral. "We're leaving," Mitesh said. "Now." Jayant hesitated, but finally agreed. We packed as fast as we could in the rain. Half our stuff was soaked, and none of us cared. We hiked back in silence, slipping in mud, hearts racing with every snap of a twig. We didn't stop until we reached the car. But the story didn't end there. A few days after we got home, Jayant called me. He sounded off. "I keep hearing it," he said, "that breathing, in my house." I tried to calm him, tell him it was stress. But then Mitesh called me the same day, said he woke up in the middle of the night and found wet footprints on his kitchen floor. No windows open, no leaks. I haven't experienced anything like that, not directly. But sometimes when it rains and I lie in bed, I swear I hear it too. That slow, labored breathing. And once, just once, I found a single muddy footprint on my balcony. I live on the fifth floor. We never talk about that trip anymore. We don't meet up. Jayant moved to a different city. Mitesh stopped replying to messages, but I remember that night. The mist, the footsteps, the way it touched the tent like it knew we were inside. And I know deep down that some places are not meant to be visited. Some places hide things that wait for the rain to fall. That spiral in the mud wasn't random. It was a mark, a warning. Story the end.
Story number 6.
The year was 2018. I remember because it was the same year I quit my job in Mumbai and moved back to Nashik to get some space from everything. I was exhausted from work, burnt out, and barely talking to anyone. That's when my childhood friend, Aniket, called out of nowhere. He had recently gotten into hiking and camping and suggested we head out for a weekend trip to Trimback Hills. Quiet, green, and only about an hour's drive from town. We ended up making it a 4-person trip. Me, Aniket, his cousin Nilesh, and a guy named Vicky, one of Nilesh's friends. I didn't know Vicky before that trip. He was soft-spoken, barely said a word, but had this intense stare. The kind of person who looks like he's always reading a room. We picked a weekend in late August. The monsoon had already painted the region bright green, and the trails were muddy but beautiful. Aniket found a spot on one of the lesser-used routes, flat ground with some tree cover, far away from the regular trekkers and close to a stream, perfect for one night of camping. We left early Saturday morning, reached the trail by 11 a.m., and hiked for nearly 3 hours through soaked ground and light rain before setting up camp. It was already misty by the time we pitched our 2 tents, one for Aniket and Nilesh, one for me and Vicky. We didn't carry much beyond essentials: sleeping bags, snacks, a camp stove, torches, and a waterproof sheet for sitting. By late afternoon, the rain got heavier. Not a storm, but steady. We sat under the tarp, sipping tea, wrapped in our rain jackets, watching the fog roll in so thick it covered everything beyond the immediate clearing. No signal, no sounds, except the constant drip of water from the trees and the soft roar of the stream in the distance. The quiet was eerie in a way I didn't expect. Even the birds had stopped calling. Around 6 p.m., we made a simple dinner of upma and boiled eggs and sat talking in the rain. Aniket told a funny story about a monkey stealing his phone once during a trek. We laughed. Even Vicky cracked a smile. Then Nilesh said something weird. "I came here once with my dad," he said, staring into the trees. "When I was 10, this same spot. We didn't camp, just stopped here for lunch. He told me this place used to be a settlement, a village that vanished." "What do you mean vanished?" I asked. "Abandoned. Some disease spread here, or maybe a landslide. No one really knows. All I remember is that he said it's not a place you stay overnight." We all got quiet after that. Aniket tried to lighten the mood by joking about ghosts in the rain, but it didn't really work. Something about the fog, the silence, and Nilesh's sudden seriousness stuck with me. It was fully dark by 8 p.m., and we retreated to our tents. The rain hadn't let up. It drummed on the fabric like a heartbeat. Inside our tent, Vicky lay silently beside me, facing away. I tried scrolling through old photos on my phone, but got bored and eventually turned it off. That's when I first heard the crunch. Not rain. Not wind. Something stepped on twigs. I held my breath. Another step. Wet. Slow. I whispered, "Vicky?" He turned his head slightly but didn't speak. I unzipped the tent flap a few inches and peeked out with my torch. The mist was thicker now, swirling with every breeze. The beam didn't reach far. I scanned left to right. Nothing. I zipped it shut again. 2 minutes later, the sound came again. Closer. And then the unmistakable rustle of fabric. Something touched the side of our tent. I sat up sharply. Vicky sat up too. Alarmed now. We heard movement outside. Wet footsteps dragging through the grass and mud, slowly circling the tent. My mouth was dry. I wanted to call out to Aniket, but something told me not to. I don't know why. I just knew with a certainty I couldn't explain that if we made a noise, whatever was out there would know exactly where we were. Then, breathing. Right outside the tent. Not fast, not animal-like. Human. Strained, heavy, wet. I pressed my ear to the nylon wall, and I swear I could hear water dripping from it, like it was soaked head to toe. I could feel its presence just inches away, not moving, just being there. After what felt like an eternity, the breathing faded. The sound of steps moved away, and the forest was silent again, except for the rain. We didn't sleep that night. In the morning, Aniket and Nilesh looked as shaken as we did. Aniket told us something came to their tent too. Touched it, breathed. Neither of them looked out. We checked the ground. There were footprints, bare, human-shaped but wrong. The toes were too long, like fingers, the heel narrow, and the spacing, each print was at least a meter apart, too far for a normal stride. We decided to leave immediately. It took us 2 hours to hike back to the car through the mud. Nobody spoke. Even Aniket, normally the loudest of us, was silent the whole way. That would have been the end of it. But a week later, something happened. I got a call from Nilesh. He sounded terrified. "Did you dream it too?" he asked. "Dream what?" "That thing, standing in the rain, watching us." He described the same dream I'd had 2 nights earlier, waking up inside the tent again, but this time unable to move. Rain pouring outside and a shadow at the flap, not opening it. Just standing. I hadn't told anyone because I thought it was just my mind replaying that night. Aniket had the same dream. So did Vicky. In each dream, the figure gets closer. On the 3rd night, it unzips the flap. By the 5th night, it enters. It's not human. Its skin looks like it's rotting from water damage. Eyes pale and wide, no mouth, just a smooth gray face with holes where the nostrils should be. And it doesn't move normally. It twitches like it's glitching. Nilesh started sleeping with lights on. Aniket bought a religious pendant he now wears all the time. Vicky moved back to his hometown without telling anyone. I tried to ignore it, pretend it was just psychological. But then one night, I woke up to the sound of dripping water in my room. I live alone, no open windows, no leaks. I followed the sound to the balcony door and found wet footprints, bare, long-toed, exactly like the ones we saw at camp. The glass was fogged from the inside. I haven't slept without lights on since. Every time it rains, the dreams return. Always the same. Always worse. In the last one, I wasn't in the tent anymore. I was in my room, and it was standing in the corner. Not watching. Waiting. Some nights, I swear I hear the tent zipper in my sleep. And now, every monsoon, when the first heavy rains arrive, I feel it near again. Like it's coming back. Like it never really left. None of us speak about it now. Nilesh deleted all the photos from that trip. Aniket refuses to go hiking again. Vicky blocked all of us, but I know we all still see it. And I know, next time I go camping, I might not come back. Story the end.
Story number 7.
It was late September when we planned the trip, during the tail end of the monsoon season. The heavy rains had started to subside in Uttarakhand, and the lush green valleys were just beginning to breathe again under the soft post-monsoon sun. I had just graduated from college in Dehradun and was looking to do something different before starting work in Delhi. My cousin Nikhil, always up for something out of the ordinary, suggested a camping trip in the hills beyond Raniket, someplace quiet and remote. We weren't complete amateurs. We had been hiking a few times, and Nikhil had a friend, Rachit, who worked with a local trekking company and knew his way around the trails. Rachit said he knew a meadow past Sitlaket, surrounded by forest and far from any tourist routes. No cellular network, no roads, no electricity, just wilderness. He claimed it was safe, rarely visited, and ideal for 2 or 3 nights of camping. 4 of us went, me, Nikhil, Rachit, and a guy named Anurag. Rachit's quiet, photography-obsessed friend who brought his DSLR and barely spoke unless someone asked him something directly. We drove out from Dehradun, through Nainital, and reached a village near Sitlaket by early afternoon. From there, we hiked 6 or 7 kilometers through winding forest paths until we reached a wide, grassy patch on a plateau. It was stunning. Fog drifting lazily through tall deodar trees, the chirping of birds echoing through the hills, and a view of distant peaks that faded into mist. It felt untouched, preserved. We set up 2 tents near a small ridge, one tent for me and Nikhil, the other for Rachit and Anurag. There was a nearby stream where we could fill bottles, and the weather was cool, the air smelling of pine and wet soil. The clouds had begun to gather by the time we finished setting up, and Rachit said it might drizzle, but shouldn't be too bad. We cooked a simple dinner over a portable stove, maggi and eggs, and shared a bottle of whiskey under the canopy of trees while it started to rain lightly. It wasn't until we lay down that the rain intensified. The drops were heavy and persistent, and by midnight, it was coming down in sheets. Our tents held up, but the wind howled through the trees, bending them and shaking our fabric walls. Nikhil was already snoring, and I tried to focus on the sound of the rain, thinking it would lull me to sleep. But then I heard a snap, a branch breaking somewhere close. It wasn't unusual for branches to fall in storms, but then came another snap, and another, closer, more deliberate. Then footsteps, slow, squelching in the wet grass and mud. I froze, thinking maybe Rachit had gotten up to check something. I whispered, "Rachit?" But there was no reply. The footsteps stopped just outside our tent. I could see the shadow of something through the rain-blurred fabric. A figure, not moving, just standing there. I shook Nikhil awake, whispering sharply. He grunted and sat up, dazed. I pressed my finger to my lips and pointed to the shadow outside. He squinted, and I could feel his body stiffen. We both sat still, not daring to breathe. Then the zipper of the tent began to twitch, just slightly, like someone was fingering it, trying to open it quietly. Nikhil scrambled for the torch and shone it toward the flap, shouting, "Who's there?" Instantly, the shadow moved back. We both scrambled to unzip the tent and looked out, torches sweeping through the heavy rain. No one was there. We ran to Rachit and Anurag's tent. They were awake, confused. Rachit came out with us and looked around the clearing. The rain was still coming down and the fog was thick, but something felt wrong. Not just eerie, wrong. Like the forest itself was holding its breath. The next morning, we found footprints in the mud, barefoot, thin, not animal, human, but strange, almost too long, like the toes had stretched unnaturally. They went around both tents, paused at the flap of ours, and disappeared into the trees. Rashid tried to explain it away. Maybe a local wandering drunk, maybe a shepherd or woodcutter, but even he didn't sound convinced. We all decided to stay close to camp and not go anywhere alone. That day was uneventful, except the fog never lifted. It stayed dense, coiling low around the trees and swallowing our voices even when we were only meters apart. Anurag tried to take photos, but complained that his camera was acting up, that the screen kept glitching, and some shots had strange smears or shadows. We dismissed it as water damage. That night, the rain returned heavier than before. We didn't drink. Everyone was tense. I couldn't sleep. I kept waiting for the footsteps. Instead, I started to hear something else. Whispers. Not in a language I recognized. Low and layered, like multiple people whispering over one another, coming from the woods. I thought maybe I was dreaming until I sat up and saw Nikhil already awake, his eyes wide. "You hear that?" he whispered. I nodded. We sat in silence, listening to it. It grew louder, then footsteps again, fast, frantic, running now, circling. Something slammed against the back of our tent with such force that it knocked over our water bottles. We screamed. Rashid and Anurag came running out of their tent, torches flashing. We jumped out too, now soaked, looking around. But the moment we were outside, everything stopped. No movement, no footsteps, just rain and fog. The four of us stood in a tight group, backs to each other, lights darting through the trees. Then Anurag whispered, "There." We turned. At the edge of the clearing, right where the forest began, was a figure. It stood unnaturally tall, its arms long, reaching almost to its knees. The head was tilted, and though the fog made it hard to see clearly, we could all feel it was watching us. The worst part was the way it moved. It didn't step. It twitched forward like it glitched in and out of position. And then it vanished. Not turned or walked away. Just gone. Like someone turned off a switch. We packed at first light. It took hours to get back to the village. The trail was slick, the rain unrelenting, and every shadow felt like it held something waiting. None of us spoke. Rachit's confident demeanor was gone. He walked ahead fast, never looking back. When we reached the village, the old man who gave us directions asked if we had stayed in the upper clearing. Rachit nodded. The man went quiet, then said, "People used to live there, long ago. They say the plague came and took them. But some didn't die natural deaths. Some were buried in the trees. Their spirits don't like visitors." We didn't ask more. Back in Dehradun, things didn't go back to normal. I started having nightmares, waking up in my room to the sound of whispers and dripping water. I began seeing flashes of movement in mirrors. The worst was the dream I had 3 nights in a row, lying in the tent, hearing the zipper open slowly, and something crawling in without touching the fabric. Nikhil started sleepwalking, something he'd never done before. Once he was found standing in the middle of the street, barefoot, soaked in sweat, muttering something in a language no one recognized. Anurag deleted every photo he took during the trip. He said when he reviewed them, there were faces in the fog, faces that didn't belong to any of us. Rachit moved to Chandigarh to live with his uncle. He told me in a late-night call that he hears voices in the rain now, that sometimes he wakes up and sees footprints on his balcony, always barefoot, always wet. I haven't camped since. I haven't stepped into a forest, and every time it rains at night, I sleep with the lights on, watching the door, waiting for the zipper sound. Story the end.
Story number 8.
The trip had been planned months in advance. Arjun had always wanted to take us to his grandfather's old farmland up in the hills of Wayanad. The land had been abandoned for decades, left to nature after his grandfather passed away, but the family still technically owned it. He said it was the perfect place, remote, surrounded by thick forest, and unspoiled. It sounded like exactly the kind of weekend we needed. Me, Arjun, Manu, and Ria had been working insane hours in Kochi, and even though none of us had any real camping experience, the idea of disconnecting under the stars was too tempting to pass up. We left on a Friday morning in Manu's SUV with the usual camping gear we'd borrowed or hastily bought online. 2 tents, sleeping bags, a small stove, torches, and some basic food supplies. Ria brought her Bluetooth speaker and Arjun printed out maps since there was no signal expected up there. It rained on and off the whole drive, but we shrugged it off. It was September. Rain was a given. After 6 hours on twisting hill roads and a final stretch on a muddy trail barely wide enough for the SUV, we reached the clearing. It wasn't much, just a flat, grassy space with the remains of a stone house swallowed by vines and moss. The forest pressed close on all sides, towering trees and thick undergrowth cutting off any view beyond. There was a broken wooden fence and a rusted gate that still creaked in the wind, which was strange because there wasn't any breeze. Still standing after 30 years, Arjun said with a crooked smile, "Told you it was perfect." We pitched the tents as the sun slipped behind the trees, lighting the sky with a dim orange hue. The rain began again, light but steady. The smell of damp earth and old wood filled the air. We cooked noodles over the stove, listened to music, and passed around a bottle of rum. For the first few hours, it felt like any other getaway. We laughed, made fun of Arjun's beat-up hiking boots, and told stupid stories about our school days. But once darkness settled in, the forest changed. The rain became heavier. The music died when the speaker ran out of battery, and the forest, so full of noise earlier, grew quiet. No crickets, no birds, just the rhythmic pattering of water on tent fabric and the occasional crack of a branch far off in the trees. We turned in by around 11. Ria and I shared one tent, Arjun and Manu the other. I couldn't sleep, though. The rain was louder now, almost unnaturally so, and something about the air felt wrong, like pressure in my ears before a storm. I assumed it was just nerves. I'd never camped this far from civilization before. Somewhere around 2 a.m. I heard movement. Not rustling leaves or swaying trees. These were footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching over the wet earth. I held my breath. Ria stirred beside me but didn't wake. I listened closely. The footsteps circled our tent once, then paused. Then again. I slowly unzipped the side flap just a little and peered out with my phone's torch barely on. There was no one there, but just beyond the faint circle of light, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A footprint, barefoot, in the mud. It wasn't ours. It was too big, too long. The toes were too spread out. I zipped the tent quickly and lay still. I don't know when I fell asleep, but the next thing I remember is the sun barely piercing through the rain and Ria shaking me awake. Arjun and Manu were outside already, talking in hushed voices. Something had disturbed the old wooden gate during the night. It was wide open. That wouldn't be odd, except that it had taken 2 of us to even budge it the day before. And now it swung freely, creaking softly even though the air was still. "Probably the wind," Manu said, but no one believed it. We decided not to pack up yet. We'd come all this way, and we didn't want to be paranoid over something stupid. The rain had slowed down to a drizzle, and we spent the afternoon exploring the overgrown property, taking photos and pretending everything was fine. But that night was worse. It started with the voices. Faint, just whispers. At first we thought it was one of us talking in our sleep. Then we realized it was outside, just beyond the tents. Not words, just murmurs. The kind you hear from the next room when someone's on the phone with the door closed. Then came the knock, not loud, not fast, just a soft knock against the fabric of the tent. 3 times. Then silence. Arjun called out from his tent. "Was that you?" "No," I said. "Was it you?" "No." We stayed awake after that, each of us holding our breaths, too afraid to step out. Around 3:30 a.m., we heard something move through the undergrowth. Fast. Heavy, like a person running through thick mud. Then nothing. The forest went dead quiet again. The next morning, we found the second tent had been sliced, just a thin, clean cut along the side, like with a razor. Nothing was missing, nothing was taken. Just Arjun looked pale. "Guys," he said slowly, "I didn't want to tell you this before, but my grandfather didn't die of natural causes. He was found hanging in that stone house." We stared at him, shocked. "You're kidding." "I'm not. My dad never talked about it. He hated the place, said it was cursed. I thought it was just family drama. But now..." Rhea looked like she was going to be sick. We decided to leave. Right then. It took us nearly an hour to pack everything in the rain. The path out was even more slippery now, the tires skidding on the incline. But none of us cared. We just wanted to be out. About 20 minutes into the drive, I realized I'd left my phone. "I'll buy you a new one," Arjun said. "We're not going back." Nobody argued. Back in Kochi, we tried to forget about it, but the nightmares started within days. Rhea dreamed of standing in the forest alone, hearing someone breathe behind her, but never able to turn around. Manu said he kept seeing shadows in his bathroom mirror, just at the edge. Arjun stopped sleeping altogether. He said he kept hearing knocks on his window every night. He lived on the 5th floor. And me, I started hearing the whispers. At night, just as I was about to sleep, a voice saying my name, over and over. Then one night I got a package, no return address. Inside was my phone. I hadn't told anyone where I lost it, and the screen was cracked, like it had been thrown. The battery was dead, but when I charged it, I found one new video. It had been recorded sometime in the middle of the second night. The camera must have been left on by accident. The video was mostly blackness, muffled rain, but near the end, someone walked in front of the lens. Not one of us. He was tall, thin, barefoot, and his eyes weren't right. They were too large, too wide, and they glowed faintly in the dark. I deleted the video. But the next night, I heard the knock 3 times on my bedroom door. I live alone. Story the end.